In a dark room, a bank of monitor screens illuminated a pale face. The rusted brown glow of the video feeds gave Roger Little more color than the sun had cared to give him in the past few months. Half a kilometer north and 200 meters down, an automated surveillance drone slowly made its way through a series of corroded metal hallways. It was oddly silent beyond the whine of computers and the whir of fans. Roger fiddled with his volume before checking the system audio. Nothing but the noises of the drone itself, no groaning, no creaking, no screaming, just the soft click-clack of the drone. Roger checked the timing. The drone should have reached it by now. He squinted into the glare and overrode the drone. Nothing but flakes of rusted metal scattered across a floor of rusted metal, fallen from the walls and ceilings of rusted metal. After several minutes of searching, Roger rubbed his temples. He drummed his fingers on his little metal desk and took a few deep breaths. He reached over and picked up the bulky plastic phone sitting on the edge of his workspace. He dialed the number and only had to wait a few seconds before it was answered. "Sir, it's Roger Little from Surveillance. We may have a problem." In the cold reaches of space, a satellite continued to do what it had done for over a decade. It hung in the weaker clutches of the Earth's gravity and watched a man wander about. The man it was watching, however, was doing something a ways away from his status quo. He was running. Through the sweltering heat of the American Southwest in the middle of its summer over the scorched earth, under the blazing sun, Mr. Lost ran. In hot pursuit was a man with fiery red hair. His black jacket left unbuttoned. It snapped behind him like shadows cast by a fire, the red trimming a much duller affair than his hair. He was gaining on Lost, who continued to make the mistake of looking over his shoulder. Each glance seemed to give the red-haired man more speed. The eventual collision left Lost sprawled on the ground for a moment before he tried crawling away. The second man was up in a near instant. He brushed himself off and waited for a moment before continuing his pursuit. He walked just behind Lost for a time until he tried to get up. The pursuer kicked his target back onto the ground. This repeated itself for some time until the red-haired man simply grabbed the man in the green jacket and dragged him in the opposite direction. They eventually came upon a third man, who had been sitting on a rock outcropping. Blood and rust clung to every inch of his body. With what seemed to be a considerable effort, the man stood. He took 2 steps before falling. The red man grabbed the rusted man by the shirt and hauled him onto his shoulder in a way that was quick but not unkind. All the while Mr. Lost remained gripped in his opposite hand. After what looked like a satisfied sigh, the red man walked east. An O5 rolled an unlit cigar back and forth over the sleek top of his desk. In front of him, the video feed on his monitor ended. Beyond that, his secretary stood at attention. The secretary took a brief glance at his clipboard. "As you can see, sir, the unknown humanoid has captured both 2933 and 920. Further surveillance from multiple sources show it is now heading for one of our facilities." The overseer idly flicked the cigar, sending it spinning. "Given the context, I'm guessing it can be safely assumed who the entity is. It's attacked 2 of the 3 little Mr. Anomalies we don't seem to have properly contained, and now seems to be headed for the site where we contain the other 17. Combined with its general appearance, yes, the list's designation number 14, Mr. Redd." Lock the site down. We don't know what Red is capable of. Considering it was able to escape 2933-1 and has been able to transport 920 for over 100 miles without stopping, it's not something we want to discover firsthand in the midst of an active facility. The secretary nodded and departed for his own desk. Left alone, the overseer plucked the cigar up and spun it between his fingers. He replayed the submitted videos and quietly thought to himself. Eventually his secretary returned, and after a brief wait, hustled back out with a freshly stamped order. Alone again, 054 slid the silver lighter off his desk and thumbed it several times before it sparked. A group of people sat in a room full of monitors, not quite like the one previously described, which was merely a one-man obligation simply for the principle of the thing. As the door so boldly claimed regarding site redacted security, SCP-2148 had gotten curious again recently. This was a security station for a Foundation site, full of attentive individuals with live feeds covering nearly every hallway and the ability to stream feeds from various containment cells, if forwarded from the cell's own containment teams. One attentive individual sat up in her chair, more so than her already perfect posture had allowed. She began squinting at one of the monitors, showing a feed of a camera deep within the facility, well away from any of the entrances. Within the frame was a trio of men. One was dressed in a black and red jacket, one in a coat of metal, and one in a green hoodie. The first was carrying the second and dragging the third, the former of which was groaning and screeching like rusted clockwork, and the latter was attempting to crawl away, despite appearing to be unconscious. She wondered how they arrived in the site despite it being locked down when no one else had made any sort of comment. The worker flagged down her superior as quick as she could and explained what she had seen. But when she pointed to the group of monitors of the area the men had just been spotted in, they were nowhere to be seen. Now one of her co-workers, who had been monitoring an entirely different wing, was reporting about them. By the time attention arrived on the monitor in question, the men were nowhere to be seen, and further examination showed they had disappeared from surveillance entirely. 054 snubbed out his cheap cigar in one hand and thumbed down one of the buttons on his monitor with the other. A round woman with sharp eyes snapped into view. After a smoky exhale, the 05 sat up and meshed his fingers together, if only for himself. His outgoing calls only showed a generic silhouette. Daisakan, I hope all is well, the site director fidgeted. To her credit, it was only slightly. Not as such, sir. Red has somehow breached the site with both Lost and Scary. More than that, he broadcast a video message from somewhere in the facility, and he's made demands. The weight of silence from her superior stayed Daisakan. After several seconds, 054 took a slow breath and said, Somewhere in the facility? Well, sir, I don't recognize the area. It appears to be a medical bay, but it definitely isn't any I'm aware of. With him was a little girl with a swollen stomach. He called her Catherine, but we don't have any subjects on file with that name. The name pressed down on the overseer's chest. He took slow, deep breaths in an effort to calm himself, but every inhale became more and more difficult. On autopilot, his hands opened his cigar case. The lighter sparked on the first flick, and he took a deep drag. On exhale, he realized what he was doing, but he decided he may as well enjoy it while he could. How in the world could Red have known about 231? 054, are you still there? He shifted out of his daze, if only lightly. Daisakan, right. Yes. What were his demands? for you to personally come in to see him, or he would kill the girl. The next pull turned half the cigar to ash. And nothing else, just you have to see him in person. 054 watched his hand shake, smoke from the cigar zigzagging. What did you tell him? That I would notify you. You didn't say anything about that being against protocol, it being unlikely of happening, anything like that? Seemed unwise to do so, given the context. He finished the cigar. If we're both alive tomorrow, remind me to give you a pay raise. Sir? He terminated the connection. One door creaked open, only to reveal another. 054 stepped through and stared down at the man leaning against the wall, an ivy sticking into his arm. Mr. Scary looked at him and smiled. The contraction chipped away some rust, and blood flowed from the edges of his mouth. Neither said anything as the overseer stepped past the little mister, glanced at the bag of morphine, and went through the second door. This one rusted open. He considered breaking into a run down the hallway and settled on a stiff jog. Some of the tiles cracked under his feet, and when he arrived at the double doors, they were open, the joints rusting them in place. I-17OSKER was all that was visible on the plaque beside the doors. Rust began to cling to some of the machinery, but the video feed of SCP-231-7's room was still functioning. Overseer 4 steeled himself before looking. A little girl lay in a hospital bed, her pregnant belly covered by her surgical gown. She seemed quite calm given the circumstances, but given her general situation, there likely wasn't much that would upset her. Next to her was a man in a red vest, his jacket draped over the back of his seat. In one hand he held the ankle of a rusting man who was attempting to crawl away, and in the other he held a children's book. The only sounds in the room were Lost groaning as his body rusted as he scrabbled against the decaying tiles, and Red reading in a warm voice. 054 found the intercom and pressed the button. Catherine winced at the squealing as the system turned on, and Red cocked his head at the noise. All right, Mr. Red, I'm here. Red released Lost and slowly turned in his seat to reach into his jacket pocket, removing a piece of paper. He marked his place in the story and shut it, setting the book on the bed. As Red looked into the camera, 054 saw flakes of brown and black on Red's skin, red lightning sparking against it, and revealing smooth skin. Red smiled. Please, no need for the Mr. Formality. We're all friends here. I'm Red, open parentheses, discontinued, closed parentheses. My friends just call me Red. How are you? 4. Geniality was not what 054 was expecting. A few moments passed, filled only with the sound of Lost banging on the door, before Red tilted his head and waved at the camera. 054 cleared his throat and said, I've been better, Red. You've been causing a lot of problems lately. Now, what is it you want? Red shrugged theatrically, splaying his palms. Sorry about that, though I do believe I was clear with my video earlier. I'd like to see you, face to face, no cameras, no PA systems, no tricks, no body doubles. Was that a knife in Red's hand? No. Nothing. A trick of the light. A video oddity. Before that, I have one question. How did you get here? Walked. This site has been on lockdown and you were able to avoid surveillance for most of your trek despite us having a satellite meant to track Mr. Lost, and you somehow not only knew of this wing, but how to access it. Like I said, I walked. As for why I knew, call it insider information. Now please, do get in here. Again, a glimpse of black in his palm, a jagged shadow that played hell with the lighting of the room. With great trepidation, 054 unlocked the blast door and dodged Lost as he darted past. After watching the little mister run down the hall, the overseer stepped into the room. It smelled of disinfectant and lilac, thanks to the small aromatizer next to the bed. He felt as his heart hammer away at his throat as he looked to Red, and clenched slightly when the little girl gave him a little wave. Red gestured to the armchair on the opposite side of the bed. Once they were both seated, Red cupped his hands together and sighed. So, this is it, Red said. The finale. The brief period after a long sentence that drips with the taste of freedom. How long have you been doing this job? The overseer was silent. Red smiled, for would have sworn the overhead lights took on a slightly bloody hues. I, Red finally said, have been a little mister for, what is it? Almost 20 years. Something like that. It's been difficult. Let me tell you. Red looked down at the dagger in his hand, which was now all too real, with something akin to reverence. He lifted it up and dragged the shadow across his own throat, cutting so deep his exposed trachea whistled softly. Red ran down his shirt, but it clung at odd places, depicting runes that sat at the edge of the overseer's memory, lightning late and stout and into the damage, the blood draining as red sparks healed the wound. The little mister took another deep breath. And there's no getting away from it. It won't let me go as long as this stupid dirt ball keeps spinning. I'm going to be here, unchanging, undying, unable to feel much beyond blinding rage. He smiled again. But what if I stopped the spinning? What if I could stop it all? What if I could stop hurting? I'd have to try, right? If that's your intention, why bring me here? Why drag the other two around? I guess I needed some kind of closure, Red said, his eyes distant. I walked. I don't know how long I did. I know that much. I somehow ended up at the Wonderworks, the place that had eluded me for so bloody long, and it was running. No old man, but the place was bustling all the same. It was the God's damned child, the oh so lovely Isabel. But what could I do to her? She wasn't the same sort as me, in a way. She asked me why you pricks hadn't collected me yet. I didn't really have an answer, but I figured, why not? Not like I had anything else to do. Suicide wasn't the option, as you can plainly fucking see. But as I got closer, I got this feeling, this itching, burning sensation digging into my soul. If I even had one anymore. There was a thing locked deep in the hole my brothers were buried. It spoke to me in ways I was never able to convey to you. Just fuck, it felt good. And I knew. I knew. I always thought I was just subject to anger issues. All along, I was subject to the king. Did you know gods can't die? They just fade, waiting for their time to come again. But they leave corpses, something to jam a spigot into and tap into whatever power might be left lying around. The old man must have gotten desperate. Brass wasn't enough, even as big as the corpse he got pulled from is. A broken universe still yields a broken power, and a sliver of a fragment isn't worth much of anything. So he tried something a bit more intact, and what was I talking about? Wait, wait, no. I used to say that I have these lucid moments. It's like, do you wear glasses? You look the type. That brief time when you put them on, when your eyes see both through and around the lens, and everything just seems to warp around you as the glass rushes forward. The world shifts as the filter expands. You wear them long enough and you stop seeing the frames in your vision. You don't feel the arms on your ears anymore. I can't tell if my humanity is the prescription or the astigmatism anymore. And I don't care. I'm so sick of it all. My eyes are strained to the point of bleeding and I can't close them. But at least that means I get to watch the end. Red eventually stirred from his trance. Here, I wanted you to have this. He removed the bookmark from its spot and unfolded it before handing it over. 054 stared at the list. One line in particular drew his eye. 14. Mr. Redd, Discontinued. The man stood there for a moment, his eyes unfocused. Somewhere in his mind, the 20th slot was filled. He leaned to the right, his hand out as if ready for a cane to take the weight. After a moment, he caught his balance and examined his right hand. Then the left, flexing and clenching them. He straightened back up and examined the room. The former body of 054 took a breath. Mr. Collector let it out. Collector reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp piece of paper, uncrumpled despite its confines. He let out a small chuckle, the paper between his thumb and middle finger. He snapped and a bubble formed around the parchment. It floated just above his palm, bounced when he tapped it, and he gave the top of the bubble a light pat and it collapsed into itself, a way for him to take out later. How are you feeling? Red asked from his seat. Better than I have in years, the collector responded. When he spoke, Red sat up and squinted. And yourself? Red flew forward, knife in hand. Collector slapped it away into a bubble, which soared just out of Red's flailing grasp. Red drew another from his sleeve and threw it, only for it to be caught in another bubble. Red in the face, Red swung a fist while simply producing a dagger into his palm. Collector caught the punch and a silky bubble wrapped itself around Red's hand. He pulled and yanked and was only able to free himself when he released the grip on his third shadow knife. How? The Red demanded. You should be dead. The girl said you were dead. I likely am. The me you are speaking to is merely a copy, made prior to Mr. Forgetful erasing me from my old body. Whatever was left in the body of Isaiah Crawford after that was Dr. Wondertainment, though with a bit too much factory mixed in for my taste. I suppose I remember all that because Forgetful couldn't get to me, as I was merely in potentia. You remember Mr. Matt? He was a fucking... We were all just tests? A fucking training ground? Not all of you. No, Mr. Collector. Dr. Wondertainment, smiled. It lacked its old rainbow glow, but it shined all the same. Forgetful in stripes to cover my tracks, the latter brother to get you all here. The smile faded. Scary. Truth be told, this whole collector concept was done fairly late into the project's development. I mostly wanted to see how things turned out. How is Isabella doing? Red glowered. So then, why was I made? The old man narrowed the eyes that weren't really his. You were a gamble, I suppose. Of course I made a grave error. As they say, Always bet on black. Red grabbed Collector by the collar. Do you think this is a fucking joke that I am somehow funny? Not as such. My apologies. I was trying to lighten the mood. What would you like me to say? That you were a defect? That I condensed a power that was much more destructive than I could have imagined and pumped it into some young man's veins? I tried to change you, but you wouldn't take much. So, Red you became. Red released his grip and his face expressionless. So I'm a mistake. Collector straightened his tie. I would say I would more say an unfortunate surprise, but who doesn't like surprises? Ah, Red reeled back, smiling. It took another few seconds for his face to move again. I'll show you a surprise. And what's that? The grin in Red's mouth was almost as sharp as the knives in the collector's bubbles. That would be telling, dear father. Can't spoil the surprise. Red sidled next to the child's bed and smiled down at her. Catherine smiled back up at him, her gaze occasionally edging towards the other Mr. Red sat down, the impact bouncing the book up and off of the bed. A chuckle left him as he bent over to get it. Red set the book down in the center of the bed. He traced out a curved knife on the cover, a spark of red following his fingertip outlining the weapon. Once completed, the red flickered and was filled with black. Red slipped the knife off of the book as one would a playing card and held it for the collector to see. When Red turned it so the blade faced the collector, it appeared to be merely a wispy black line flickering in the light. Are you ready? Red asked Catherine in a soft voice. The child took a few breaths. Are you sure you can? I don't want him getting hurt. Red twirled the knife in one hand and brushed back her hair with the other. These people may have locked him away, but I just so happen to have the key. With trembling fingers, she lifted up her gown to expose her belly. Brands marked the swollen skin, dull and dark. They crackled like coal when Red touched them. Catherine laid flat and squeezed her eyes shut. The twisted scalpel slipped into her, the blade so fine she didn't wince. But as Red ran the knife across her, she began to scream. The runes on her skin sizzled as Red cut through them, vapor rising into the air. Within the girl, red and purple pulsed and writhed, her womb mangled and distended. It squished and squelched as her yelling became racking sobs. All the while, Collector stood impassively at the foot of the bed. He had seen as bad, caused worse, but a twinge of guilt struck him as he thought of Sweetie. Hopefully she would at least speak to him when he found her. Collector stirred from his thoughts while Red cleared his throat, knife hanging over the mess. Don't lose focus, old man. You're about to witness the birth of a new era. Or at least the death of this one. The knife dropped. Rather than cut or tear into the tissue, the dagger simply sank into it, black into a molten red, but it was swallowed, a pinprick of bright red showing itself. There was a moment of stillness, even within the girl, as the shadows cast across her intestines swirled to red. The room was suddenly all too full. The smell of iron was nearly palpable, as loud ripping sound was the only thing accompanying Catherine's now resumed screams. Hardened flesh that matched the color of a dying sun dripped with blood and placenta. It pressed everywhere within the room, on the walls, under the bed, even within the inhabitants. The ceiling began to crack, and then the tearing sound intensified enough to drown out the sobs. The ceiling exploded. Earth and concrete above it was obliterated as the thing rose, Level after level was leveled by the growing expanse. It grew as it rose, each rising floor destroyed in greater capacity. Eventually Site Redacted was exposed to the open air, where dark clouds were beat about by a pair of reverse wings. 11 mouths creaked open to take their first breath. Foundation personnel stared up in slack-jaw awe. At a distance, civilians who could spot at least the crown of horns began to panic. Down in the medical room, the trio remained, a thin umbilical cord connecting Catherine to her son. Red cackled and pointed the monstrosity out to the spent child. Collector tapped the side of his head, and a bubble formed around it. The seventh son spoke. Clouds broke, and the sky cracked under the weight of his words. The air itself tasted of blood. All those within the range of his mighty voice felt crimson run out of their ears, with the exception of a single man standing in the center of it all. His bubble vibrated rainbows against the onslaught, but held. "Do you see?" Red yelled, none hearing him over the din. He touched the blood coming out of his ear and showed Collector. "It's over! I can finally be over!" Once the bubble stopped shaking, Collector popped it. The world was silent, waiting for the son's next words. He took the umbilical cord and proffered it to Red. A crack of a smile broke Red's face. From nowhere he produced another dagger, and with no amount of ceremony, separated mother and child. Knowing this, the seventh son drew another breath. When he spoke again, his words fell on deaf ears. The air around him shimmered slightly, reflecting a rainbow in places. Collector lowered his hand from where he had touched the Scarlet King's spawn. Something stuck to his hand, which he wiped off on the bedsheet. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie again. After a moment, he turned to Red, a small smile on his lips. "I am so sorry. I'm afraid I couldn't hear you over all that noise. What were you saying?" Red said nothing. He did nothing for a short time. Then his eye twitched. He looked at the shimmer of the bubble around the seventh son, at the stain on the bedsheet. Bony palms dug into his eyes as he tried to rub whatever nonsense was clouding his vision. When he looked again, the scene was the same. "No!" Red finally said, a full sword in his hand. He slashed at the bubble, the blade digging into the film. Then it flew out of his hand as the bubble pushed back. "No!" Collector watched Red attack the bubble over and over and again, with a variety of shadow weapons. After a dozen or so weapons were embedded in the wall behind him, Red slashed at his own hands and thrust the scarlet lightning into the bubble. It did nothing but catch the light. "No!" Red repeated, turning on the Collector. "No!" "Sorry, is this distracting you?" the Collector said. He raised a palm and snatched away the seventh son, now the size of a newt, contained within the ball in the little mister's hand. "I'll put it away." Red watched his savior vanish with a whimsical pop. Mouth agape, he turned to his queen. She couldn't look back. Her eyes glazed over. Her breaths came in short, ragged bursts. Red ground his teeth together and turned back to Collector. With a mouth full of blood and darkness, Red yelled, "No!" He stumbled forward, knife in hand, without the usual motion. It buried itself in Collector's chest. "No!" Red screamed, spraying blood in the Collector's face. He pulled the knife out of his father, and continued stabbing him. "No! No! No!" Blood flew from the knife with each stab. Droplets froze in midair, catching other sprays and sloshing together into hovering bubbles of blood. Color drained from Collector's face as Red gained more and more. No, Red whispered, losing breath. His arm fell, opening a large gash across Collector's stomach. The knife fell and disintegrated, merging with the shadow cast by the last blood orb. A tear droplet met it. No. Collector, Isaiah, hugged his brother's son. Red sobbed against the offered shoulder. When the cries weakened in strength, Collector led Red back to his seat. Red fell into it and wrapped himself in his jacket. With a flick of the wrist, Collector brought the crimson orbs into himself. By the time he finished collecting what shadow weapons remained, he regained his color, though he moved slowly. He went about popping the ornaments away, save for one. He took it out of its bubble and sat on the arm of the chair, between Red and Catherine. I can't say this is how I envisioned the family reunion, Collector mused, but I think I can afford you at least one gift. Red almost laughed. What could you possibly give me? Less give, Collector tapped Red's forehead. More take. Red blinked. He stared at the swirling hate bubble in front of him. He winced when it vanished with a light tap from Collector. Emptiness filled him. Wonderful, calming emptiness. Tranquil, simple serenity. Red felt where Collector had prodded him. It's gone? Simply somewhere else. Red nearly sprang from his chair. The girl, you could take whatever they did to her out? Make her right? I don't believe they made her wrong, Collector said, turning his gaze to Catherine. If the Scarlet King could enter this world without humanity's help, he would have done it already. She chose this life for him. There is nothing for me to take from her, except... The black dagger seemed to try to catch the light in his hand. At least let me do it. I didn't wash your hands of blood just for you to dirty them again, Red, Collector said. What's a few more drops on mine? He was silent for a moment, and then Red said, I don't think I really want that name anymore. Oh? He closed his eyes. The rolling red sea of his mind was now a calm blue. I'm thinking blue. Blue? With two E's. Collector wheezed a laugh. So be it. Excuse me one moment. Blue? It was over quick. Blue found it hard to look at her, so he covered her up. So, what now? Now, you enter one of the Foundation's little boxes, like your siblings. What? That's it? Blue stood. No, that isn't fair. It can't just end like... Collector held up a hand and Blue went silent. Collector reached into his pocket slowly, like the old man he looked to be. You may be free of the Scarlet King's branding, but not of Wondertainment's. I'm in the body of a Foundation overseer now. We have to act our parts. Collector finally retrieved the paper he had pulled from his pocket earlier. He offered it to Blue, who took it gingerly. Wow, you found them all and became Mr. Collector. But the fun isn't over yet, because now a whole new set of misters will soon be in development. Brought to you by our own Miser. 0. Mr. Collector. 1. Mr. Chameleon. 2. Mr. Headless. 3. Mr. Laugh. 4. Mr. Forgetful. 5. Mr. Shapy. 6. Mr. Soap. 7. Mr. Hungry. 8. Mr. Brass. 9. Mr. Hot. 10. Ms. Sweetie. 11. Mr. Life and Mr. Death. 12. Mr. Fish. 13. Mr. Moon. 14. Mr. Red. Discontinued. 15. Mr. Money. 16. Mr. Lost. 17. Mr. Lie. 18. Mr. Mad. 19. Mr. Scary. 20. Mr. Stripes. Blue made a double take. But the fun isn't over yet, because now a whole new set of misters will soon be in development, brought to you by our own Miser. Blue looked up. Collector's smile had more strength than the rest of his body combined. Because we're not done yet.